Let's be honest, pivot tables are fantastic. They are quick, easy to use, and give you valuable insights from your data, but they have their limits. With just pivot tables, you would only be able to summarize data from a single table or source, perform basic calculations like sums or averages, work efficiently with small data sets. But once your data grow, they start to struggle. This is where Power Pivot comes in. It's better, faster, and more reliable when dealing with complex data. With Power Pivot, you can combine data from multiple tables. No more merging tables manually or using messy VLOOKUPs. Perform advanced calculations with formulas like DAX. Undo millions of rows effortlessly while keeping your file size small. In short, Power Pivot allows you to create pivot tables using information from 2 or more tables, all while maintaining the flexibility and speed of Excel. Let me show you how. Before we dive into Power Pivot features, we need to have it enabled in Excel. So navigate to the Data tab on your ribbon. On the far right, look for Power Pivot. If it's not there, go to File, Options, then Headings. In the Manage drop-down, select COM Headings, click Go, and check the box for Microsoft Power Pivot for Excel. Click OK, and the Power Pivot tab should appear in your ribbon. Without enabling Power Pivot, you won't be able to work with the data models or use its advanced features. To demonstrate Power Pivot capabilities, we will use a sales performance dataset with 2 tables, the sales tables and the salespeople table. The sales table contains sales ID, product, revenue, profit, and salesperson ID, while the salespeople table contains salesperson ID, name, and region. Download the practice file from the description so you can follow along. So here is where we start to see the difference between the regular pivot tables and Power Pivot. Instead of combining data manually with formulas like VLOOKUP, we will load both tables into Power Pivot. So select any cell in the sales table, go to the Power Pivot tab, and click Add to Data Model. OK. Now we have our sales table loaded into Power Pivot. So let's repeat this process for the salespeople table. Select any cell, go to Power Pivot, click Add to Data Model. The salespeople table has also been loaded. With regular pivot tables, you would have to merge the sales table and the salespeople table into one big table using VLOOKUP. This increases the file size and adds complexity. One of the most powerful features of Power Pivot is its ability to link data across multiple tables without duplicating or merging them. This enables advanced analysis and ensures your data stays organized and efficient. Let's see how relationships work and why they matter using a sales performance dataset. So switch to the diagram view in the Power Pivot window. We are going to drag the sales ID from the sales table to the sales ID in the salespeople table. A line will appear indicating the relationship. One is on the salespeople side, indicating that each salesperson appears 1, and asterisk on the sales side, indicating that a salesperson can appear multiple times for different sales. So in our sales performance dataset, the sales table contains sales records with salesperson ID appearing multiple times for different transactions. The salespeople table has 1 record per salesperson, including their name and region. We can now create a pivot table that combines data from both tables, such as showing the total revenue from the sales table and by region from the salespeople table. This is something regular pivot table can't do without manually merging the data. To avoid some common relationship errors, I'm going to give you some tips. While creating relationships, you might encounter issues. Here is how to troubleshoot. If there are duplicate IDs in the salespeople table, Power Pivot won't establish a one-to-many relationship. Make sure the one table has unique values. The one table in this case is the salespeople table. And if a salesperson's ID in the sales table doesn't exist in the salespeople table, the relationship may not work as expected. So always verify your data before linking tables. Power Pivot requires at least one table to have unique values in the column used to create the relationship. So now let's create a pivot table to analyze sales performance. Go to the Insert tab in your dataset and select Pivot Table from the data module. We're going to have the pivot table placed in a new sheet, so have that selected and click OK. Now in the pivot table fields, you can see that we have two tables showing. We have the first table, the table 1, with all the fields, and the second table, table 2. From the salespeople table, we're going to drag region to the rows section. And from the sales table, drag revenue and profit to the value section. Now notice the difference. With Power Pivot, you're pulling data from two separate tables. A regular pivot table can only handle this if the data is in a single table, which requires extra steps like merging. Now let's take things further by calculating a profit margin. Open the Power Pivot window and select the sales table. Click in the Add Column field and enter this formula. Let's have this formatted a bit and have the column renamed to profit margin. Regular pivot tables can't handle row by row calculations like this. Power Pivot use DAX formulas which are more powerful and flexible. Let's make your reports more interactive and visually insightful by adding KPIs and slicers. A KPI, that is key performance indicator, allows you to track whether a measure like profit margin is meeting your target goals with visual cues. To create a KPI in Power Pivot, you first need to create the measure explicitly in the calculation area. This ensures the Create KPI tab is enabled. So right here in Power Pivot, make sure the calculation area is visible by clicking on the calculation area tab. And in the calculation area in any cell, I'm going to have this formula entered. So if you press enter, we have an error message that says a measure or column with the name profit margin already exists. So because we can't have a measure with the same name, we have a profit margin column and we want to have another measure created in the calculation area. So we can either have this column deleted or change the name slightly. So I'm going to wipe this off and probably delete this column. Now back in the calculation area, I'm going to have the formula pasted again and press enter. The measure will now appear in the calculation area. And we also have the Create KPI tab enabled. This is the exact same formula we used earlier for the profit margin column creation. However, the measure is calculated using row level data, e.g. profit and revenue. When used in a pivot table, measures must return a single aggregated value, e.g. sum, average, etc. for each grouping in the pivot table. So, because we're going to have this measure used in a pivot table, I'm going to have it updated to include aggregation functions. Now enter. To enable Create KPI, right-click on the profit margin measure or select the KPI tab in the ribbon. In the Create KPI dialog box, our base value is the measure we created, the profit margin. For the target value, choose absolute value and have the target set to say maybe 50%. So I'm going to type in 0.5 to represent 50%. The lower threshold should be less than 1%, so I'll drag it all the way down. And the upper threshold should be 50%. Now let's understand the indicator colors. Red means below the lower threshold. Yellow means between the lower and the upper thresholds, and green means above the upper threshold. Click OK to apply the KPI. Now the KPI should display visual indicators like red, yellow or green in our pivot table. So I'm going to save this, close it, and let's check our pivot table. In our pivot table, we have a field for the measure we created, profit margin, with a drop down for the value, goal, and status. So if I bring in the calculated profit margin and then the status field, this is what we have. We have the green code shown for profit margin above 50% and the yellow code for the profit margin less than 50% but more than 1%. So with this, we have visual indicators in our pivot table showing performance at a glance. Slicers are interactive filters that make it easier to navigate and customize your data. Let's add one. So right here in the pivot table, select Pivot Table Analyze tab and click Insert Slicer. In the Slicers dialog box, select field like Region from the Salespeople table or Table 2 and Product Category from the Products table. Then click OK. Adjust the slicer's placement and size on your worksheet. And click any of the slicer buttons to filter data in your pivot table. You can also hold on to the control button on your keyboard to press multiple slicers at once. So earlier, we created a relationship between the sales table and the salespeople table. Let's take it one step further by introducing a new table, a product table. This will demonstrate how pivot table handles multiple tables effortlessly, even with large data sets. So I've just added the new product table in a dataset. Select any cell in the table, press Ctrl T to have it formatted as a table. Go to the Power Pivot tab and click Add to Data Model. The product table will now appear in the Power Pivot window. We have it indicated here as Table 3. And you can keep adding tables and relationships without duplicating data. Regular pivot tables can't handle this complexity. If you're ready to take your data analysis to the next level, start exploring Power Pivots today. Download the practice file, try it yourself, and let me know in the comments what features you would like to learn next. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Excel tips. See you in the next video.